Okay, so today we will spend a little short uh, time and trying to wind up the course. Um, so let me because I have only a few points to discuss today. So let me sort of repeat a few things from the last lecture. We were discussing failures, system failures, and then looked at the various solution options that we have, the principal tool that is used, which is log, and the various kinds of logs, and depending on the log, what should be the recovery procedure. All these issues we were discussed. Now, an important aspect is the aspect called recoverability, which I briefly I have introduced in the last lecture also. So the whole thing arises from the fact that if transactions commit in certain kind of order, then it's possible for us to get into for the database to get into a trouble. So I have given a sequence of events here that a transaction T has modified a DB item and it is doing some more work. Meanwhile, so this is the case of the reading dirty data. So meanwhile, some other transaction S has read that item X, completed its work. But suppose S is allowed to commit, then in such a scenario, it's very clear that we will get into trouble because we really don't know what T is going to do in the near future. So T might finish successfully, in which case we may not have much trouble. But if for some reason T, for example, having encountered an internal error, it might decide to abort, in which case it would turn out that S has actually read dirty data. So the whole thing has come about because we have allowed S to read an item that has been modified by a running transaction, and then instead of waiting for that running transaction to come to a conclusion, this transaction has gone about and then committed, and we have allowed such a commit to take place. So this is the classic scenario in which we will get into trouble, and so we isolated this and then defined what are called recoverable schedules. So a schedule S, this is not a transaction, no, it's a schedule. So it's a sequence of operations of several transactions. So the transaction is the schedule is called recoverable if in that schedule no transaction commits until all the transactions from which it has read have actually committed. Okay. So basically this transaction T needs to wait till each of those transactions from which it has read some item completes. So the completing could be that they commit, or they may even abort. So if all of them commit, then T can go ahead and then ask for a commit because it has really finished its work. But if any one of them aborts, then it is necessary that T also has to abort because it has read dirty data. Okay. So if in such a scenario, we also encounter this phenomenon called the cascading aborts or cascading rollbacks, because if this transaction T has to abort, then all those transactions which have read an item that has been released by transaction T also have to unroll, and because they have to unroll, whoever has read an item that has modified by them also have to unroll, and it cascades. Okay. So cascading rollbacks may occur, but then without this property being satisfied by schedules, the database would not be able to give durability assurance at all, right? So what durability requires is that if some transaction commits, then the effects of that particular transaction are permanently recorded in the database on the disk. So So, such a kind of semantics we will not be able to provide if we do not take care about observing this recoverability constraint. Now, we have we have also discussed this concept of serializability, where this was more to do with how do transaction operations interleave and what kind of transaction operation interleavings are acceptable or desirable. So, in that context we have discussed the issues, and then we have identified the notion of serializability, and one particular way of achieving that serializability called conflict serializability, which is again achieved through lock based protocol. So, we have discussed two-phase locking protocol, and if transactions follow two-phase locking protocol, then serializability is guaranteed. Okay. But then we realize that serializability does not put any restrictions on the order in which commits have to happen and things like that. So, strict serializability definition does not include anything about commits, whereas and also recoverability has nothing to do about interleaving of operations and things like that. So, these two things are actually orthogonal definitions, but then in practice what we need actually, we need schedules that are both recoverable as well as serializable. Only then that particular transaction system will be able to achieve all the desirable properties called especially all the acid properties of atomicity, isolation and mutability. Okay. Consistency of course is a programmer's responsibility. Okay. So, now in the context of this entire thing, we need to also think about whether we can avoid these cascading rollbacks. Can we avoid cascading rollbacks? Because rollback is a costly operation. We will have to undo a lot of efforts that have been done on the database and all that. So, in such context we can, there is a schedule is, so we introduce this notion called cascadeless schedules. These cascadeless schedules are those kind of schedules in which we do not have this need for cascading rollbacks. So, basically such a schedule is called ACR schedule also, which basically stands for avoiding cascading rollbacks. ACR basically says avoiding cascading rollbacks. So, schedule is called cascadeless or ACR schedule if in the schedule transactions read values written by committed transactions. So, if I am reading some item, I must ensure that it has been last written by, or whoever wrote that last is a committed transaction. But how do I know? As a transaction I will not know. So, we have to cleverly again modify the our locking protocol in such a way that when transactions are running, they will not be allowed to read items that have not been committed by, that have been written by uncommitted transactions that have been, okay. So, this we will shortly see how we can modify the two-phase locking protocol to achieve that. But once this is there, it is very clear to that every one of these avoiding ACR schedule is indeed recoverable, because so we have put this restriction saying that it has to be from committed transactions. So, such a a schedule in this schedule, every transaction surely will commit only after all the transactions that it has read from commit, and that is what the recoverability constraint is, right. If you are committing, then if you have read some item that that was modified by some other transaction, you should wait for that to commit before you commit. That is what the recoverability constraint is. But now, if you do not even read the items unless that fellow has committed, then you are guaranteed that you are only picking up items that have been written by committed transactions, and so you will surely commit only after all of them commit. So, any such schedule in which this property can be guaranteed somehow the transactions read only values written by committed transactions will be cascadeless, and such a thing is actually not very difficult to achieve, because all that you have to do is the locking schedule is in your hands. The locking schedule is in your hands. So now you dictate as to how or the 2PL is has to be appropriately changed. So for locking based methods for concurrency control, notice that there are other ways of achieving concurrency control. Especially we didn't have time to discuss this other method. They are called timestamp based approaches for concurrency control. These timestamp based concurrency control are actually also called optimistic concurrency control techniques, in the sense that they will let the transactions run and then check whether everything is proper, and if not so, take some corrective action. Okay. So assuming that most transactions don't get into trouble with each other. So this is an optimistic way of doing that. Whereas the locking based concurrency control based on two-phase locking protocol is a pessimistic approach. It will assume that if you don't do anything, transactions will conflict with each other, and so it is enforcing complex serializability and thus making sure that the schedules that arise are conflict equivalent to some serial schedule. Serial schedules are safe. So that is the intuition. So when we restrict ourselves to locking based concurrency control methods, a way of achieving this cascadeless schedules is to modify the two-phase locking protocol and make it into a strict two-phase locking protocol, where we will impose that a transaction must not release any locks, especially write locks. Write locks are those which are acquired for the purpose of writing, updating an item, right? So any write locks until the transaction has either committed or aborted, and the commit or abort log record has actually been written to the disk. Okay. So till that time you don't release locks. So if you don't release locks, if a transaction doesn't release locks, then there is no chance for any other transaction to acquire a lock on some item and then use that, right? So in this case, you are keeping all the locks with you till you commit or you abort. Okay. So if you commit and then you have released items, then anybody else who is reading these items that you have modified are actually reading items that have been written by a committed transaction. So there is no issue, right? So cascadeless schedules will arise. In case this transaction has aborted, then obviously those transactions have to be aborted. But this aborting a transaction is not a major issue. We can do that just like we have done error recovery procedures. We can take one particular transaction and undo its operation. So this modification results in what are called strict schedules. So strict schedules are those schedules in which the transaction neither reads nor writes in any item until the last transaction that wrote X has terminated. We don't know whether successfully or otherwise it has terminated. So this will result in what are called strict schedules, and we can so strict schedules are following 2PL is a strict 2PL. So it's more stricter version of two-phase locking. Why is this stricter version of two-phase locking? Because in two-phase locking, all that we said is that don't ask for a lock the moment you start issuing unlocks. The moment the moment you start releasing locks, don't ask for any more locks. That's all we said there. But here we are saying that keep all the locks with you and then release them at the end. So there is no question of asking for any more locks. You are keeping, so you have only a locking phase, and then at one go you release everything. Okay, so these are two-phase locking protocols, and so they are serializable. They will result in serializable schedules, and they are also cascadeless schedules because they don't allow any transaction to read an item that has been written by an uncommitted. Okay, so these are so strict two-phase locking is very popular protocol that is used in most of the relational database engines, and it achieves cascadeless serializable schedules, and that's how transaction systems run well. Okay, so now let's briefly look at the issues in how transactions in SQL work. So there are a couple of parameters for the transactions in SQL that you can set up. One is called the access mode. So it's called access mode. The other one is called isolation level. So there are two access modes: the read-only access mode and read-write access mode. The default is read-write access mode, and isolation level is something so in practice it is of course theoretically all the schedules have to be serializable schedules. Then we are guaranteed that the transaction system is running perfectly well. Okay, but in practice SQL would like to give the users an option of running their transactions in a slightly relaxed isolation level. The strictest isolation level is serializability. Okay, so so the default is serializability. If you don't say anything, it will run in serializability isolation level. So lower isolation levels are available, and you choose it at your own risk. You choose it at your own risk. So actually, these are meant for running transactions that kind of collect statistics and aggregates and things like that, where you are not really so bothered about the up-to-date values and things like that. So those may not matter to you when you are simply computing some averages and things like that. And there is one particular isolation level called uncommitted. It's actually dangerous. So SQL will take an extra precaution to allow only read-only transactions to run at such low isolation level. So they will actually pick up some dirty data, keep reading them and things like that. But they will not be allowed to modify anything in the database. So each transaction ends with either commit or rollback. So so these are the isolation levels, the transaction isolation levels. So the highest isolation level is the serializability schedules. So in that, so these are the various kinds of problems that might arise if you choose any lower level of isolation. So there are what are called read uncommitted. So this is the lowest level of isolation that one can use, but this is the most dangerous level. So SQL allows you only to run read-only transactions in this mode. Okay, so access mode will be automatically set to read-only if you choose this isolation level. So all these problems might arise. Dirty reads might arise, unrepeatable reads might arise, and also what is called phantoms will arise. I will shortly talk to you a little bit about this phantom business. Then the next highest level is higher level is read committed, where dirty reads don't occur, but unrepeatable reads might occur. We have discussed this unrepeatable reads earlier, and phantoms also might occur. As repeatable reads, no dirty data will be read, and no all the reads are repeatable, and but phantoms might occur. I'll tell you about what phantoms are. And of course, the best thing to do is to run your transaction at serializability level, in which you are guaranteed that none of these problems arise. So the problem of phantoms is something which is like this. This is to do with So supposing some transaction has selected some tuples based on certain condition, say for example student or department equals 5 or something like that. So a bunch of tuples, it has locked all of them and it's going ahead and working with them, say getting max mark or something like that. So a transaction T2 will come into picture, update the database with a new tuple that satisfies this condition. So this record actually was not even existing in the database when the T1 started. So it has started and it has locked certain items which it is going to use, and so obviously if T2 enters some record, it might affect what is being done by T1. Suppose it's computing max marks or something like that. So this kind of rows which get into the picture after the transaction is actually started running are called this phantom rows, because they kind of come into the picture out of the blue. So these things cannot be detected by any of these things. You have to take some extra precautions. So the usual locking protocols will not. So you have locked whatever you wanted to do, but so nobody will be able to touch it. But then here is a new thing that you should have locked, but it wasn't existing at the time you started. So this is a phantom. So there is a solution for this, and that we will not go into a lot of details about that, but it's called index locking. So so there is a related thing called predicate locking. So basically you should not just lock blocks or database items, but you must also put somewhere a record saying that anybody who satisfies this particular condition has to be locked. It should not be entered into the system. So that's what is called index locking. So that's a little advanced concept. So using such techniques, they will be able to solve this issue of phantoms in such context. Okay. So with that, so choose the isolation levels as serializable levels. But of course, some statistics collecting transactions which you don't mind if they read some uncommitted data and things like that, you can run them at lower isolation levels, so that you get some. Then they will actually run fast because they're not waiting for any logs to be released and things like that. They run fast. Good. So with that, let's close the discussion. I come to the end of the slides as such, but you can see that this I have given you an introduction to the various issues that are there in the concurrency control recovery. I have of course taken it as one module because the issues are pretty interconnected, but there are a lot more details in this particular topic, and I urge you to kind of spend time, enjoy reading a little bit more about this fascinating field called the transaction process. Right. So with that, we kind of come to the end of the course formally. Thank you.